What's going on, everybody? Long time no see. It's been about a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks since we've been live. Had a lot of prep and stuff to do. Had a lot of stuff going on. How y'all doing? How's everybody doing today? Give it a little bit of time because I didn't really do much promotion that this was going to be now, rather than on Thursday, because I had stuff I had to take care of at work. Yeah. Hopefully everybody's Sunday is going well. Good to hear. We got some people coming up now. All right, cool. We'll be getting started shortly here. You guys enjoyed Modern Day Debates? Anybody watched it? No, that you guys did. What is this? That's just like an everyone or something. I hate the everyone notifications. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and get started here. So, pause the music here. So welcome everybody. This is the Crowdsourced Politics News Roundup. I am the host and moderator of the Crowdsourced Politics podcast, Cypher, as you all know. And today we're going to cover a lot of news. We have some stuff coming out of the union negotiations between SAG-AFTRA and the streaming services and the Hollywood studios. We have some news about the 2024 election, and we have some stuff coming out of the SCOTUS that their new session just started. So we have a lot of stuff that we're going to cover. Before we get into that, we want to promote the debate we just had last Sunday. Yes, last Sunday, yours truly was debating live in person for Modern Day Debates over in Irvine, Texas. And we'll drop the link for that debate here just shortly. But I was debating Sean Fitzgerald. You might know him better under the moniker of Actual Justice Warrior. And we debated the merits of whether or not the left is soft on crime. Whether or not something is soft or tough on crime is not really a lot of contention there. There's more contention about what is effective and whether or not tough on crime policies are actually effective and therefore actually tough on crime. So that was the kind of approach that I took to the debate. Just to give a little bit of a review of said debate, I believe I did well, but there was things that I could definitely have improved on, specifically around the opening statement. Lots of people said it was too long, and it was a bit long. It was about 6 minutes or so. But more importantly with that, I don't think it's too much of the time that was the problem, but my delivery of it. I kept losing my place when I was reading it from my laptop, and it just looked bad. It really did. So that is one big problem of it. But yeah, so the debate itself, though, I did think went pretty well. Technically, I won the debate. So the audience comprised mostly of Actual Justice Warrior or Sean Fitzgerald fans, and like a few maybe liberal or libertarian people that didn't agree with him too much on all of it. And by the end of the debate, there was less people that voted for him than last time. So that means there was a good. That it should mean that my argument was at least somewhat persuasive to get people to be like, well, I don't know anymore. But they didn't lock in the audience. So whether that was a lot of people that left or not, that's a little bit of contention there. So I'm not considering it to be a huge win, even if it was a technical win. But you should check out the debate all the same. So I'm going to get the link for y'all and drop it in the chat here. Just 1 second. Hey KOE, glad to see you. Just got out of church. How you doing, sir? Pray Jesus' love washes over you someday. Okay. Well, I'm glad that you're finding meaning in life through your religion. That's cool. Hold on. I got to get that debate. There we go. Here's the stuff. There we go. So we don't have it on my channel. I don't pay for YouTube Premium, so I don't have a way to download the video. But here is it from the Modern Day Debates channel. So go ahead and check it out. Again, like I said, the opening was a bit rough. If you can please get past the opening, listen to the merits of the arguments, and let me know what you think. I think I did well. I think I referenced a lot of things that are there. And we're going to talk about it probably next week a little bit. Maybe I'll do a professional recap of said debate when I have some time, maybe on Saturday or Sunday. Sorry about that. The weather suddenly changed in Texas, so I'm getting a little post-nasal drip, and it's getting annoying. So I might cut my mic off every once in a while to take care of that. But yeah, so we'll be doing a retrospective of that debate and saying what I can improve on for next time, because hopefully there will be a next time. James, the host of Modern Day Debates, really did enjoy that debate personally. He thought it was really wild to listen to. Considers both Sean and I to be very well read and very well informed when it comes to crime. So hopefully that means I'll be invited back for more debates in the future. But with that, let's go ahead and get directly into the show proper now. All right, welcome everybody. This is the Crowdsourced Politics News Roundup for the week of November 6th, going through November 12th, covering all the news that was of the last week with the kind of analysis only the crowd can provide. As a reminder, though, the Roundup is alternating our election 2024 coverage and U.S. economy segments with coverage of Russia's war in Ukraine and the Israel-Hamas war. We're going to be also using YouTube Shorts during the week to bring you some news bites and some bite-sized news segments that are only about a minute or so. They're going to cover a range of issues that won't be covered on the news segment proper, that don't require as much pontification, that don't require as much pontification or elucidation on it in order to understand. And you can find those on our YouTube, Instagram, or TikTok channels, wherever you may prefer to get them. But let's go ahead and get started now with our coverage of the 2024 election. So going into the elections held this past Tuesday, the cry from the crowd was how badly things are going for President Biden and, by extension, Democrats themselves. The rhetoric began with and was fed by a New York Times Cinema poll released on November 5th. The poll showed Trump leading Biden in 5 of the 6 key swing states. This generated some overwrought headlines from legacy media that claimed Democrats were panicking. Pundits and others seized on the poll to predict a Democratic shellacking from Republicans in last week's elections as well. This is our first election 2024 segment. So from the outset, let's address polling, starting with an overriding fact about polling in general. Polls themselves are not actually predictive. They provide a snapshot of a given situation at the moment the polling occurs. So let's turn to the November 22nd of 2022 article from Fortune magazine with the headline, quote, "Pollsters got it wrong in 2018, 2020, and 2022. Here's why polling is no more than a statistical sophistry." They got it wrong, not because their artificial intelligence systems failed, but because none of us can learn if we cut off true facts and hide in a daze of denial. Assuming turnout is pseudoscience. Pollsters can only extrapolate the turnout rates of a previous year's election. The last couple of election cycles have seen record turnout across both sides of the aisle, especially with younger voters, lessening the value of already displaced historical precedents. In other words, if the amount of people that are voting is more and in more demographics that had not voted previously, the polling is going to be off to a degree. They adjust polls that are taken in order to reflect the likely voter, and the likely voter for the last, excluding 2020 election or 2018, 2020, and 2022 elections, had been historically wider and older than than those election turnouts had been. So if they adjust those numbers to reflect that reality, the polls are going to show a difference than what actually happens on election day. This is something that's important to know. This doesn't mean that polling itself is useless. It's very useful in understanding where the electorate might reside, but it is not a predictive market, which is why the aggregate of polls is better to look at. Now, what you hear depends on who you ask in polling as well. So some polls sample most likely voters, while others surveys all registered voters or even all citizens. This can provide vastly different results. Pollsters only have rough exit data to work with across demographic breakdowns. They don't I'm sorry. I apologize for that, everybody. I'm going to start that bit over. Like I said, weather changed. I got a little bit of postnasal drip going on, so it's messing with me right now. But let's go ahead and start that over. All right, what you hear depends on who you ask. Some polls sample most likely voters, while others survey all registered voters or even all citizens. This can produce vastly different results. Pollsters only have a rough exit poll data to work with across demographic breakdowns. They don't have official data by age, gender, religion, race, ethnicity, marital status, household size, income, employment, education, party, and ideology, among other things. So with extremely low clarity to begin with, pollsters have to make unilateral assumptions around these crucial demographic weightings, much more than they would like to admit. The sheer number of pollsters as well, which has exploded over the last 20 years, creates voter fatigue, tedium, and less willingness to respond for privacy and social desirability reasons. Pollsters are highly aware that some types of voters are more likely to respond than other voters. To adjust for respondents' propensity to be online, they use a propensity score. This also calls for unilateral assumptions without any grounding in actual voting data. But even the smallest tweaks in these base assumptions can cause filtering algorithms that would significantly alter the tenor of the polling results as well. Then there's sampling methods. Pew has documented that telephone respondents have fallen below 9%, which is not considered anywhere close to valid measurement in any social science field. Online surveying can be more problematic because there is no national list of email addresses from which people could be sampled. There's no systematic way to collect a traditional probability sample of the general population relying on the internet either. Then there's sample size. With the exception of eldermen, the response sample sizes are often far too small. Most polls survey less than 1,000 people, and sometimes only a few hundred. A narrow oversimplification asking for more than what the data can give makes things even worse. For example, a subcategory with 7 respondents gives nothing but noise, because there isn't enough information there to go on. There's also the issue with wording bias. Poorly phrased questions can create discrepancies between what pollsters are trying to measure and how audience interpret that question. This is a phenomenon social sciences researchers call demand characteristics. And it was worsened by the fact that many pollsters provide only 2 possible answers to a question. So before I continue on here, KOE. So this is a common misconception about polling. So what you are talking about is the predictive measures, not the national polling average measures, which is what most people rely on. The predictive markets are using all kind of manners of different weighting algorithms and things like that to predict what the winner will be based on the data and other things that they put in there. Hillary Clinton was predicted to win the 2020 or the 2016 election. However, the actual national polling showed that she would win the popular vote by plus or minus 2%. By about 2%, plus or minus 3% of the overall polling. And that's exactly what happened. She won the national vote and but did not win the presidency because we don't have a national or referendum for presidential elections. We have the Electoral College. So the polling was actually pretty good in 2016 as far as predicting where people were going to vote or who people were going to vote for, just not in the states that mattered. But let's continue on. There's also the issue with drama seeking. So the motives of the pollsters and their sponsors can be questionable, with trade-offs between attention and accuracy. Many polls are commissioned by partisan groups with obvious biases. And some polling outfits also use the prerogative polling results to gain the prominence of stature while lacking expert academic authority. High-profile polls helped lower-profile institutions compete commercially in the attention economy. You'll be inundated with polling for the next year. Understanding the importance of things we just covered can help you stay informed and prevent both overconfidence and anxiety. As Jim Fallows notes, quote, "If any professionals were as off base as consistently as political quote-unquote experts are, we'd look for someone else to do those jobs." The media needs a close election, or the perception that an election is close, to create drama. In theory, drama equals higher ratings, which equals more ad dollars as well. There are enough There are enough known unknowns inherent to political polling methods, not to mention any unknown unknowns, which regulate them to more of an art than a science. Now let's talk about Tuesday's elections. Go super for Democrats. The New York Times Synod polling was at the forefront of pundits' minds going into Tuesday's elections. The poll foretold a morbid outcome for Democrats, and they were wrong. This is reporting coming out of the Washington Post. Kentucky and Mississippi held gubernatorial elections. Virginia's Republican governor, Glenn Youngkin's political future was on the line, and abortion rights loomed as voters headed to the polls. These elections provided the most data we've gathered thus far on actual voters at the polls between the 2022 midterm elections and the 2024 presidential contest that happens in just 12 months. The big ones from Tuesday are the following. Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear turned aside a challenge from Trump-backed Republican State Attorney General Daniel Cameron relatively easily in a red state. Ohio became the latest red-leaning state to vote in favor of abortion rights on the ballot, and by a significant margin. It passed Issue 1, enshrining the right to abortion into the state's constitution. The pro-abortion rights position has now won on all 7 state ballot measures since Roe v. Wade was overturned in mid-2022. Turnout was also strong in Ohio, suggesting that the issue continues to be animate for voters. In other words, it is driving people to the polls, and that is being positively impacting Democratic chances. Democrats not only avoided a potential GOP takeover of the Senate in the much-watched Virginia state, but they also flipped the state house, taking full control of the legislature as well. It's the latest of many post-2016 elections in which Democrats can come away with good feelings. They clearly won in 2018 and 2020, and after Roe fell in 2022, had one of the best midterms for a presidential party in modern history. Democrats have continued to significantly overperform their 2020 presidential margins in special elections and other races throughout 2023. Yes, Democrats lost a governorship in Louisiana last month, but that's a very red state, and Democratic Governor John Bel Edwards was term limited as well. In other words, it was an open seat. Republicans also held Mississippi's governorship, but by about 5 points. Ohio wasn't the only place where the signs of an abortion rights continued to be strong for Democrats either. Youngkin and Virginia Republicans campaigned hard on a 15-week abortion ban. They reasoned that voters would be more likely to accept that limit on abortion as opposed to a total or a 6-week ban, but it didn't work. Among those hardliners was Cameron, who was at one point endorsed a state law banning abortion with no exceptions, though he later said he would support some exceptions. The race featured a late, powerful Beshear ad with a childhood rape survivor criticizing Cameron. Think of that, a red state Democratic running on abortion rights and actually winning. Only in a post-war Roe world would this be possible. Cameron was also endorsed by Trump. Whether that endorsement harmed his election chances is unknown, but we can look to the 2022 elections for a clue here. In the midterm elections, Trump-endorsed candidates easily won primaries, but the vast majority could not make it over the finish line in the general election. Democrats also won a Pennsylvania seat, they couldn't win the general election, which shows that Trump actually might have hurt those chances. Additionally, though, Democrats had won a Pennsylvania state Supreme Court race last week, a race in which they sought to emphasize abortion access. While that race wasn't determinative for control of the court, it echoed Democrats running and winning on issues in a vital state Supreme Court race in another swing state earlier this year, Wisconsin. The Ohio result is also worth emphasizing for a couple of other reasons, though. Republicans had tried to defeat the measure in August by raising the threshold for passing ballot measures to 60%. That didn't work. In other words, they tried to change the rules of the game midstream, like something they always complain about. Can't just change the rules right before an election. And yet, they still failed. Now, the Ohio measure also appeared to be flirting with the high 50s, suggesting Ohio could vote more in favor of such a measure than neighboring and swingery state Michigan of 56.7%. We'll see if this continues to look as if it's a silver bullet for Democrats as time goes on. But at the very least, Republicans should probably thoroughly revise the way they have been pushing an issue that's still vexing them. And Democrats will surely now put this on as many ballots as possible. See Arizona, South Dakota, Missouri, and Florida, making it as much of an issue as they can. The big question heading into Tuesday night was what the results might say about Youngkin's political heft on a national stage as well. The night ended with more reason to believe that Beshear might one day wind up there on the national stage. A governor has only so much control over state legislative races, and Virginia, again, is a blue state. But Youngkin invested heavily in trying to get a state legislature that could help him push along his agenda. And he leaned into this off-year election as an audition for national political relevance. The fact that Republicans not only failed to win the state Senate, but also lost the state House should help kill whatever illusions people might have about a Youngkin riding in as a late Trump alternative in the 2024 race. And the fact that people still think that there's going to be more Republicans that enter the race in 2024, despite the fact that the field is already winnowing and Trump is just dominating the primaries over, well, a primary vote hasn't happened, but the polling anyway is dominating the polling, is kind of just wishful thinking at this point as well. Now, Beshear has also won 2 races in a state that favored Trump by 26% in 2020. The first could have been dismissed as a fluke, given that in 2019, he faced an unpopular Republican incumbent in a tough environment for the GOP. But he significantly expanded his margins of victory this time around. And he's just 45 years old. The media began last week with stories breathlessly hyping certain doom for Democrats due to the President Biden's low polling numbers. After results of this election failed to support that hype, the media decided that Democrats won in spite of Biden's poll numbers. But Democrat candidates are running on Biden's policies and accomplishments, which are obviously buoyed by the utter and very public dysfunction of Republicans in Congress. And this point cannot be emphasized enough. The dysfunction that is happening within the Republican Party, especially within the House of Representatives, their inability to have picked a speaker, their kicking out of a speaker over minor differences, essentially. The fact that the person that ended up getting elected as speakership is there by all of a fluke, and now all the stuff and the craziness that surrounds him and his ideology is coming out, is giving people a very much a sour taste in people's mouth, leaving them a sour taste in their mouths. And it should be also noted that even though the polling numbers for Biden are low, the job approval ratings, that includes people that will vote for him in the general election that dislike what he's doing, because the alternative is worse. Say what you want about lesser evilism, it's still less evil, and people are going to vote for people that aren't going to make things worse by comparison. Wrapping this up, though, there's little doubt that the GOP's lack of focus on policy issues that impact everyday Americans is driving the only polling that really counts. That is votes. The choice voters make in the voting booth. But that concludes this segment of the news roundup. Let's see. Okay, no other new comments, so let's roll right into talking now about the Republican debate that just happened this past Wednesday. Let's get into it. So the third Republican presidential debate was held this past Wednesday night. It aired opposite the Country Music Awards, which may have affected viewership, or maybe the ratings sucked because the target audience just doesn't care. The debate's rating hit its lowest number yet, with just 7.51 million viewers, according to The Independent. With only 5 candidates on stage for the first time, Chris Christie, Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy, and Tim Scott, each had far more time to speak. They had little to say about Trump, even when given the chance just over 2 months before the Iowa caucuses. They sparred in a substantive debate that dissected disagreements over aid to Ukraine, Social Security, confronting China, banning TikTok, and how to approach abortion. But there was something surreal about such detailed discussions unfolding among candidates who seemed so far from the Oval Office. Even DeSantis and Haley, who asserted themselves as the leaders of the non-Trump pack. The New York Times summed up 6 takeaways from the debate in Miami that may be best remembered for Haley snapping at Ramaswamy, saying, "You're just scum." Nikki Haley emerged as a power center on the debate stage. She gave a forceful performance that took advantage of the night's focus on foreign policy, presenting a clear and hawkish vision of Americans' role in the world. Leaning into her experience as a previous U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, she staked out expansive interventionist positions that cut against Mr. Trump's America's First foreign policy vision. She backed Ukraine to the hilt. She said she would support military strikes against Iran. And she said that the United States needed to support Israel with whatever they needed and wherever they needed it. Ron DeSantis mostly left Trump untouched, satisfied to prosecute his own case and push back on his rivals like Haley. It was the same strategy he used in the first 2 debates, with little traction being gained, despite the fact that he is wearing platform shoes to make himself taller. Now, without Trump present on stage, though, the 5 remaining contenders for the second place were left to tear one another down, and they did so with varying levels of nastiness. The first question to the candidates was the fundamental one most of them have struggled to answer to Republican voters. Why should voters pick them and not Trump? Chris Christie was the sharpest in his attack, arguing that someone who faces Trump's criminal charges cannot lead the party or this country. Haley praised Trump's presidency and then criticized him, saying that he had gone weak in his knees on the Ukraine and that his time has passed. Vivek Ramaswamy defended Trump in passing, and Tim Scott talked about himself. After 3 debates, this much is clear. Some of the candidates on stage really don't like one another. The most loathed appears to be Ramaswamy. From the start, he fought not just with the rivals flanking him, but also with the NBC moderators. And in his opening statement, he urged the head of the Republican National Committee, Ronna McDaniel, to resign. When talking about Ukraine, Ramaswamy appeared to call Ukraine's Jewish President Zelensky a Nazi. He made acidic attacks on Haley, mocking her foreign policy and calling her Dick Cheney in 3-inch heels. Now, this one needs to be expanded upon a little bit here. There is a growing isolationist, anti-military interventionalist, unless, I don't know, against certain people, certain places in the world, wing of the Republican Party. It isn't that this wing of the Republican Party is less hawkish than the other wings of the Republican Party. It just means that their hawkishness is directed at other things that they care about. For example, there has been calls by Vivek Ramaswamy and others to actually deploy U.S. troops to the Mexican border to quote-unquote stop the invasion of migrants crossing into the United States, either seeking refugee status, or crossing illegally. They believe there's been talks about from these people to actually invade Mexico with Mexico's permission, apparently, or something, in order to take on the cartels. It's like that none of these people know anything of what the United States has done within the Western Hemisphere over the last, 50 years? Yeah, since the 1970s. When it comes to dealing with the drug trade, the cartels, criminal organizations, and the like. I mean, there's entire Netflix series dedicated to going after Pablo Escobar. I think there's like 2 or 3 of them at this point, where the DEA and the US military is running intelligence operations, embedding people within the Mexican military in order to use special forces style training in order to take out the drug cartels. The primary problem within Mexico and Central America is that the fact is that these governments are fairly weak and corrupt and other things. It isn't the fact that the United States hasn't been helping them take on the cartels for, like I said, almost 50 years now. It's the fact that the governments need help stabilizing the country. But the U.S. military cannot do that. The U.S. military does not have the ability to nation build without a clear political vision to do so. At least it hasn't been since, World War II or the Korean War. And they don't want to do that either. So what they're basically saying is that they want to invade these places, take out their cartel, and leave it to whatever might happen, which Iraq, Syria, Libya, Yemen, Afghanistan, or any indication whatsoever of what happens when you go into a country to eliminate a problem without any expectation of fixing the underlying root causes of said problem are to be believed, you're only going to be left with more problems afterwards, probably worse ones, as the populace gets radicalized against you and whatever you stood for when you invaded in the first place. So this should be a non-starter completely. But the isolationists aren't so isolationist when it comes to certain things, and this is one of them. We can also talk about the isolationists being against the war in Ukraine because they don't feel as though the United States has a vested interest in Ukraine. Whether or not you want to believe that's wrong, which I believe is wrong, the other problem is they don't really they don't look at Putin as like an enemy. They look at him as a fellow traveler in a lot of respects. He is, or at least paying lip service to things that they care about. Being anti-gay, being anti-trans, being pro-religious, being pro-masculine, and all these other things. He's basically played them like a fiddle and gotten a lot of cultural support from right-wingers in the United States and some lefties, left-wingers as well, be just leaning into these sorts of tropes, for lack of a better term for it. So we shouldn't view this wing of the party as isolationist or anti-military intervention. It's not this intervention, not be hawkish on this issue, which is clear to anybody that paid attention during Trump's presidency when he, bombed the hell out of them in Afghanistan. He assassinated Salim bin Soleimani, and the like, or even, what he said that he would do with the Israel and Palestinian conflict that's going on right now. So that's the problem here with that. But let's continue on. Now, Ramaswamy also slipped in a crack about DeSantis' footwear, suggesting that the Florida governor is too wearing heels, which honestly, he probably is. Remember, the cis have the most gender-affirming care on the face of the planet. Don't forget it. But for his part, DeSantis just ignored him. Now, when Ramaswamy later invoked Haley's daughter's use of TikTok, she demanded, quote, "Leave my daughter out of your voice," and then added in almost disbelief about the exchange, "You're just scum." After Tuesday's defeat, the Republican candidates knew that they would... When Ramaswamy later invoked Haley's daughter's use of TikTok, she demanded, quote, "Leave my daughter out of your voice," and then added in almost disbelief about the exchange, quote, "You're just scum." And honestly, bringing in someone's kids into a political discussion about this is pretty scummy. But After Tuesday's debate, the Republican candidates knew that they would face questions about the way forward on abortion as well, and they mostly seemed uncertain of what to say. Quote, "We're better off when we can promote a culture of life," said DeSantis, who signed a 6-week ban in his state. He said little at all about what his party should do or what he would do as president. Quote, "At the same time, I understand there are some states are doing it a little bit differently." Haley described herself as opposed to abortion, but said that passing national restrictions would be virtually impossible, arguing that it's crucial to be honest with the public. And she's not wrong about this at all. She's absolutely 100% right about this. The Republicans aren't going to get a national abortion ban passed unless they control the House, the Senate, and the presidency with a 62-63 majority in the Senate. It's just not going to happen. And given the political makeup of the states, having a 63 plus Senate for one party is probably not going to happen again for a very long time, absent some ridiculous thing that happens that no one can foresee. And it's absolutely true. And for her part, Haley seemed to be trying to appeal to general election voters as well. Quote, "I don't judge anyone for being pro-choice," she said, which is a far cry from what many Republicans, how many Republicans view this issue. We can say what you want about how Republicans talk about how like their women are victims of abortion industrial complex and stuff like that, benevolent sexism, all that stuff. But at the end of the day, Republicans really do view the people that support abortion as monsters. They really do. And that shouldn't be surprising to anybody. The way they talk about it, they view it as murder. Like, if you seriously believe that something that someone was doing was murder and objectionable and outright evil, why wouldn't you view those people as bad? Lefties do it too. Liberals do it too. Like, all this stuff should make sense. This shouldn't be controversial to say. But let's continue on, though. Now, it was the kind of line that makes Democrat strategists worry about her strength if she were to win the nomination, but also one that the GOP base is unlikely to welcome, as we just said. It's also amounted to a reminder that Republicans, after decades of championing against abortion rights, have yet to figure out what to say after finally getting their wish through a Supreme Court that Donald Trump reshaped. Tim Scott qualified for this debate by the narrowest of margins, with only a single poll, the legitimacy of which some of his rivals have privately disputed, that ensured a spot. But the threshold will be higher for the next debate in December, and Scott's allies acknowledge that he needs to do something, anything at all, just to remain a factor. And it would not be surprising if Tim Scott is the next to exit the Republican race for presidency. But yeah, so what does this all mean for going into 2024? Well, I think it should be clear that as of right now, unless anything drastic happens, Trump is likely to be the nominee. The results in Iowa are not that predictive of what happens nationally, but there should be, like, given the polling, where the polling's at with the Republican base, given the fact that where the zeitgeist is within the Republican base, the likelihood of any of these other challengers actually dethroning Trump and replacing him as the Republican nominee is pretty small. It's still possible, don't get me wrong. We can't predict what happens in the future. For all we know, Trump could be, trip on his shoelaces in the middle of the road and get hit by a truck. Truck Coon can take Trump out. Trump in Isekai world. What would that be like? Dear God. But it's something that could happen, right? We don't know what could happen. And if I had to make a guess about, God forbid, I don't know, God forbid, but, if anything were to happen to Trump and he's suddenly out of the race for whatever reason, I think that the primary voters would be kind of scrambling to pick the next person. I don't think that they've actually looked that deeply into who they would support absent Trump, because there hasn't been a real need to. Now, there's a lot of political pundits out there, especially in the Twitch and YouTube political debate sphere, that are very much really liking what Ramaswamy is saying, Vivek Ramaswamy is saying about everything. They would say, if not for Trump, I would vote for him. I think that he would actually pull a lot of people to his side, given his anti-hawkishness in some areas, but pro-hawkishness in others. He has fully embraced the whole MAGA aesthetic when it comes to taking on the woke and the deep state people. And so I think that his value would rise with that. I also think that him and DeSantis are naturally going after the same sort of base there. So they would be actually splitting whatever Trump voters would like. The majority of Trump voters anyways would like. And then if it's just between Chris Christie, Nikki Haley, and those two, I think Nikki Haley could end up being the dark horse candidate. And that's not because of, where the Republican base is per se, but because of how the Republicans' primary actually runs. If Trump's support is split between the three of them, and then she's able to consolidate the other people into her coalition, then she could, by a plurality of votes, win a number of primary ballots going into Super Tuesday. And I don't think this is controversial either to say. I think this is very much where I think the voters in general are. And it's just one of those situations where if Vivek Ramaswamy and DeSantis are going after the same base, and that base is roughly 40%, or we'll say in the Republican Party 60%, but they split it evenly between the two of them, then the remaining 33% or so could go to Haley, and she could rise up from it. So I wouldn't count her or those two out or from dropping out of the race anytime soon. I also don't think that any of these candidates that are on the stage for 2024's in the Republican primary is actually going to end up being Trump's pick for vice president. It could be possible that Vivek gets picked. It could be possible for that to happen, but I don't think that's what Trump will do. I think Trump might pick somebody that people don't really know outside of the activist circles within the GOP. It's possible that he would pick somebody like Carrie Lake. I think that's also a big possibility. I think he's going to go for somebody that is not really well respected by the establishment. He picked Pence for that reason, and to also kind of coalesce the evangelical base around him. That has been cemented now. The evangelical base isn't going to abandon Trump. Again, unforeseen circumstances aside, like as of what we know right now, I don't think they're going to abandon him. And so I think that he doesn't need to do that. I think he needs to pick somebody that's going to energize his base more and maybe tamp down on some of the stuff that might be hurting him in the general election. And picking somebody like Carrie Lake or another GOP or another Republican woman would help in that regard to an extent. How much of an extent, I don't know. But it would help if he were to do that. So I think that's probably what he'll do in that regard. But I don't know who that person is. I really don't. And I don't think anybody, I don't even know if Trump knows who that person is right now. I don't even know if he does, to be honest with you. We still have a little under little under 6-7 months before the general election actually seriously kicks off. So I think that doesn't need to be picked anytime soon. And I think that's where we are. But everybody, with that concludes this segment of the news roundup. Oh, I wonder if I got picked up by the mic. All right. Well, we got more U.S. politics to cover, so let's go ahead and get into it, starting up first with the House of Representatives. And then we're going to talk, of course, about the looming shutdown that is going to be on the shoulders of the House. We have to talk about it. It's something that's coming up fairly quickly, and it's only a thing that the House itself could avoid, to be honest, at this point. So let's talk about it. So, new speaker deja vu all over again. We're back to what's become a familiar place since the Republican Party gained control of the House of Representatives. We are just days away from a possible government shutdown. According to a Thursday article from the New York Times, House Republicans have remained at odds with one another on spending. They scrapped their legislative work Thursday and left Washington with no plan to avert a shutdown that will happen this Saturday at 12:01 a.m. if Congress fails to act. This Saturday being the 18th of November. Funding the government led to the removal of the last speaker. Okay, I'm sorry. let me say that again. So funding the government led to the removal of their last speaker, and so far it's confounding his successor, who is far more conservative and less experienced. Speaker Mike Johnson's efforts to pass 12 separate spending bills to fund the government hit the exact same obstacles that Kevin McCarthy faced when he tried to pass those same bills. Saturday evening, Reuters reported that Johnson unveiled a two-step plan to avert a shutdown. But don't get too excited here. That plan is going to fail. Instead of excuse me. Sorry about that. Instead of a continuing resolution or a CR that would fund federal agencies for a specific period, Johnson's plan would fund some parts of the government until January 19th of 2024 and others until February 2nd of 2024. House Republicans hope to pass the measure on Tuesday. The House Republican stopgap contained no supplemental funding, such as aid for Israel or Ukraine. The House and Dem majority Senate must agree on a spending plan that President Biden can sign into law by Friday. Johnson unveiled his stopgap a day after Moody's, the last major credit rating agency to maintain a AAA rating on the U.S. government debt, lowered its outlook on the national's credit to negative from stable. Moody's cited political polarization in Congress on spending as a danger to the nation's fiscal health, which is true because if the government isn't funded, that it puts a lot of government funding and money that is circulating the economy to a grinding halt, which creates all kinds of complications for the economy at large. For his part, the Louisiana Republican appeared to be appealing to two warring House Republican factions: hardliners who wanted legislation with multiple end dates, and centrists who had called for a clean stopgap measure free of spending cuts and conservative policy writers that Democrats have rejected. The proposed measure would extend funding to military construction, veterans benefits, transportation, housing, urban development, agriculture, the Food and Drug Administration, and energy and water programs through January 19th. Funding for all other federal operations would expire on February 2nd. Johnson, who has won the speaker gavel less than 3 weeks ago, may put his own political future at risk if he's unable to win support for his plan. He may find himself forced to go with a standard continuing resolution that Democrats will vote for. And this is against things that he stands for, generally speaking, as well. Because he is a conservative. He is very much against government spending. He doesn't like the IRS that existing. He wants a lot of different cultural things passed out of the House in order to bolster up, what his worldview is in the nation. And that sort of stuff. All kind of similar things that McCarthy was facing as well. Now, McCarthy was ousted from Speaker's seat by 8 Republican hardliners early last month after he moved a bipartisan measure to avert a shutdown on October 1st, when the fiscal year of 2024 began. McCarthy opted for the bipartisan route after hardliners blocked a Republican stopgap measure with features intended to appease them. Now, we at the Roundup have reported on the Republican chaos around this issue extensively. It almost seems like the House Republicans want to push the economy into a ditch, harm the U.S. credit rating, and cause inflation to rise again, all because of worldview stuff that shouldn't have anything to do with necessarily government funding itself. And that would, after all, give them something to run on in 2024. They sure as hell don't have anything else, though. No policies, no platform, no agenda beyond harming Joe Biden politically and any way they can, even if they have to create the scenarios themselves. Call us crazy, but maybe it's time to stop the bullshit games and just fund the United States government. Because that's really what's needed here. have the political fight happen in 2024. You just had a 2023 election in some states. You had 2022 election. You didn't get a mandate or a public mandate for anything. The only thing that this proved at all is that, you know, a lot of voters don't like either party, and you barely won a slimmest of majority in the House. So you have to compromise if you want to accomplish anything. I understand that the Republican Party doesn't care about governing mostly. They don't care about funding the government. If anything, they would like the government to be pared widely down. But that's not what the American people want. So you have to kind of go with what the American people want, which is some modicum of compromise, which is what McCarthy got negotiated with Biden and got some concessions from them, and then went back on all of that, creating a distrust between the Democrats and Republicans again, because they can't trust anything McCarthy said, and they don't like this new guy. So unless it's in writing, you're not going to get anything. And if you think that the Democrats are going to be the ones that bear the brunt of the criticism going into 2024 when you ousted your speaker over bullshit, you're not reading the tea leaves correctly, my friends. You're not reading the polling correctly. You are out of touch with what most voters want. You only know what your small little sector of the country wants. That's roughly, 30% of the country that are energized and donating and participating in some of the quote unquote grassroots efforts that don't make up the majority of the country. And you're missing the forest for the trees. And you need to adjust where you're at, or you're going to get whipped in 2024. It's really that simple. I don't know. Should I be giving Republicans this advice? Probably not. I just want the government funded. And I want it to be funded not on the backs of bullshit, just like most people. So that's where we're at. We have a completely dysfunctional House of Representatives because the Republican Party is dysfunctional. They have a competing factions within it that have different worldviews about what the government should do, or if it should do anything. And a bunch of people that only are there to try to make a bigger name for themselves so they can keep donation money flowing into their pockets and be reactionary against liberal policies. It's stupid. It's really dumb. But if that's the game that Republicans want to play in the House, if that's what the Marjorie Taylor Greens, the Lone Boberts, Mike Johnsons, the McCarthys, the Chip Roys want to play, then that game can be played and you can suffer another defeat in 2024. I warned you. But with that, my friends, that concludes this segment of the News Roundup. Now we have just a little bit to cover over the Senate, so let's go ahead and get it done with it quickly. So Reuters reports that the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer on Thursday took a procedural step to allow the Democratic Majority Chamber to pass a stopgap government funding bill to avert a partial government shutdown. The infighting and incompetence of the House of Representatives, Republicans' majority, have prevented the Senate from voting on a stopgap funding measure thus far. If the House Republicans fail to start the process in time, Senate Democrats could pass a bill of their own to head off the fourth partial government shutdown in a decade, though any Senate bill would have to be passed by the House as well. In another report from Reuters, Democrats in the House, in the Senate rather, in another report from Reuters, Democrats in the Senate blocked a Republican-sponsored bill to provide emergency aid for Israel without sending any to Ukraine. The bill, which was passed by the Republican-led House of Representatives last week, came under criticism from Democrats for delaying support to Kyiv and other politicizing the conflict in Israel. Quote, "Our allies in Ukraine can no more afford a delay than our allies in Israel," said Democratic Senator Patty Murray, who chairs the Senate Appropriations Committee. Several weeks ago, the House presented a broad funding package of $105 billion that tied together $61 billion in aid for Ukraine with around $14 billion for Israel, as well as other items. This plan encountered opposition from House Republicans and recently appointed Speaker Mike Johnson, who said that backing Tel Aviv in its fight against Hamas takes priority and proposed a standalone funding bill just for Israel. Again, this is all the same kind of stuff. They support Israel for a variety of different reasons that would make sense for supporting Ukraine as well. However, because of the one disagreement there, which is that they don't view Putin as a cultural enemy, they're not going to want to fund Ukraine. And also probably because of all the bullshit that people concocted with Ukraine helping Joe Biden somehow and all that other stupid shit that obviously isn't true, makes it tainted their view on this as well. Maybe we shouldn't fund either of them. I'm not opposed to funding either of them. I'm saying maybe we shouldn't fund either of them. That would be a stance to take, where it's like, we're isolationists. It's their problem. Fuck them, right? But this whole like Israel takes priority because Hamas is evil and Russia good or not evil enough is just asinine. Like what Russia has done to Ukraine is at least on a similar moral level as what Hamas did to Israel. Ukraine is a budding U.S. ally. Israel is an ally. Like those are two reasons enough to fund both. But here we are. We can talk a whole lot about why Republicans themselves, especially people like Mike Johnson, really love Israel, but that will be for another day. But my friends, that concludes this brief segment of the News Roundup for the Senate. Now, if you're just joining us, everybody, welcome. This is the Crowdsourced Politics News Roundup. We do this once a week, typically on Thursdays, from 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to roughly 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, covering the news that was with a kind of analysis only the crowd can provide. This is a one show of many that we're attempting to do here. It's the only one we've done in a couple of months because being busy with work, other things that are going on, but we have other stuff we're trying to do. We do Cipher State, which is foreign affairs and foreign policy focused podcast, which we're going to be rebooting here shortly. And we do another one that's called Praxis Run, which is supposed to interview different activists from any side of the political equation, any special issues. But we won't interview anybody we consider to be fascist or terrorists or those sort of people. So you won't see us interview people that support the killing of innocent people or anything like that. But we might interview pro-gun people. We've interviewed a pro-life person. We interviewed a school choice we'll interview a school choice person, like that sort of stuff, to understand why they think the way they do, why they got activated to get involved, and maybe anything that we else can glean from that, in order to help people understand how best they can get involved. So that's something that we're doing. Also trying to do more debates. So if you want to debate me, you can get a hold of me on Discord. It's the easiest way to do so. Like I said, I just debated Sean Fitzgerald on crime. I think I did pretty well. Check that out. But if you want to debate me, we're making room for it. We're making time for it here. And we're also looking for a video editor. I do not have the time to edit the videos like I used to. I just don't. There's too much stuff going on. I'm working later than usual. All this other stuff that's going on, I just can't do it, keep up with it. And we really need to. We need to do the video, because every time I've consistently been able to edit videos, put them up on the web, I've gained 20, 30 subscribers, and then I hit a patch where I can't get anything edited out in a timely manner, and it's just it levels off. So we really need a video editor. I'm willing to pay for this. I'm not directly pay you, like we're talking decent money here, negotiating with you whatever you believe decent money to be, but we're not trying to pay pennies on the dollar. We're trying to pay at least a fair market rate for it. So if you know anybody that's looking to edit videos or can edit videos or what have you, reach out. We have a couple of people that have edited videos for us in the past, but for various reasons, those stopped. Partly it's my fault. Partly it's the fact that, they got busy with their lives as well, new jobs, that sort of stuff. But if you know anybody that's into video editing and can video edit a Talking Head podcast, please let us know. That's where we're at. Let's go ahead and start getting more into the news roundup, though, with some information coming out of the Biden administration, specifically with China. Let's get into it. As we anticipated in our previous reporting, President Biden and Chinese leader Xi Jinping will meet for the first time in a year next week, according to reporting from The Independent. The meeting caps months of diplomacy by top U.S. officials to ease tensions between the world's two largest economies and manage what Biden has described as a, quote, strategic competition between Washington and Beijing. According to the White House officials, the two leaders will have their first sit-down since last year's G20 summit during next week's Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Conference in San Francisco. Let me restate that. So according to White House officials, the two leaders will have their first sit-down since last year's G20 summit during this next week's Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Conference, specifically the leaders meeting in San Francisco. One senior administration official said that the meeting would take place on November 15th in an unspecified location in the San Francisco Bay Area. The officials described the U.S. position going into the meeting as one of relatively strength, with the U.S. economy booming thanks to a game-changing investment in the American strength at home, delivered in bills signed by Biden just last year. The last 8 months have seen 3 separate meetings between Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, and his Chinese counterpart, as well as visits to Beijing by Anthony Blinken, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, and Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo. In turn, China's vice president, foreign minister, vice premier, and other top People's Republic Conference officials have trekked to Washington for reciprocal sit-down meetings. Those came as the U.S. and China have launched what a senior U.S. official described as, quote, working-level consultations in discrete, carefully chosen arenas, such as arms controls, maritime issues, and microeconomic and debt issues. The planned meeting between Biden and Xi Jinping, who have known each other for roughly 12 years, will be the 7th interaction between the two leaders since Mr. Biden took the office in January of 2021. In response to a query from The Independent, one of the officials who briefed reporters on Thursday said Biden is also expected to offer a warning to Xi against undertaking any influence operations or other efforts to interfere in the upcoming 2024 presidential elections. And this concern is valid. There has been reports and proven influence operations across Southeast Asia, as well as in Australia, not the Netherlands. Oh wait, is it the Netherlands? No, not the Netherlands. I'm sorry. Greenland. No. God damn it. Oh geez. New Zealand. Okay. All right. So these concerns are valid because there have been proven instances of Chinese influence operations happening within New Zealand, Australia, Japan, as well as across Southeast Asia and the Philippines, with them trying to influence the public opinions of China, of the local populations in those countries to be more favorable to Chinese issues. For example, fishing rights in the South China Sea, exploratorial rights, etc. Also trying to increase positive feelings towards the Communist Party within China and the like. And this is very much something that pretty much every government does to its neighbors. The United States does it too through the Latin America. What's Latin America? Latin America, OPA, the Organization for Latin American States. Let me look up it. Organization for Latin America States. The OAS, Organization of America States. Yeah, the OAS, Organization to Promote Economic, Military, and Cultural Cooperation among its members, which include almost all the independent states of the Western Hemisphere. So this is something that happens. The United States does it. Everybody does it, right? Putting them on notice is very, very crucial because it's like, hey, we're going to be looking out for it. We're going to know when you're doing it, and we're going to hold you accountable. And this is something that every state should do for all of it. Like, even against the United States. If the United States is running an influence campaign against people overseas, then, their public should be notified of it and should be stopped. This isn't to say that we can't, freely talk about issues, but propagandizing, hiring fake people, running troll farms, that sort of thing is stuff that just we really shouldn't tolerate pretty much anywhere. Manufacturing consent is way easier to do than it was in the 70s, and it needs to be looked at. So that's one issue. The other issue is that obviously that we don't want China to take over Taiwan. Even Vivek Ramaswamy wants to arm Taiwan up until they can basically take the technology Taiwan has developed and develop in the United States and then cut them off. But until then, we have to he wants, to keep Taiwan independent from China as much as possible. And so these are issues that I think have broad support within the American public to take care of. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens coming out of from APEC, the APEC conference. Our APEC conference. So we're gonna see how that goes, and we'll report on it next week or the week after, depending on how news shakes out from the conference, as the case may be. But let's continue on though with the news roundup, and let's move on now to some SCOTUS updates, some important cases, and we're going to turn over to the SCOTUS blog because they do a good summary of what's going on with at SCOTUS with some brief explanations, and I can pontificate as needed. As the case may be therein. So let's go ahead and get started with it. First up with the case about qualified immunity. It's up there. All right.
What if you get arrested, but you think the police got it wrong and they're actually retaliating against you for engaging in free speech? And that's protected by the First Amendment. That's the issue at the center of a brand new case at the Supreme Court. Meet Sylvia Gonzalez. She's a 76-year-old grandmother from Castle Hills, Texas, and she was elected the first Hispanic councilwoman in Castle Hills. She claims that the mayor and government officials arrested her in retaliation for championing the removal of the city manager, and she orchestrated a non-binding petition signed by folks in Castle Hills. She was arrested after her first council meeting for violating a Texas law that prohibits destroying or tampering with government documents when the petition, which she had given over to the city's mayor, was found in a binder of documents that she brought with her to the meeting. Now, Gonzalez said she probably picked the document up by mistake, but nonetheless, she was arrested. She spent the day in jail, and
that's such a technicality thing, bro. Like, she wasn't, she was the one that submitted it, right? So why would she steal it? Come on. This should be clear retaliation for even doing it in the first place. There's no reason to arrest her. Like, hey, do you have that document? Oh, shoot, I have the document. Yeah, here you go. Or they can just ask everybody, did anybody accidentally take the document? Like, there's no reason. When I'm talking about, like, using police incorrectly to go after, like, minor offenses that don't really have anything to do with anything, and it breaking down trust between communities and everything else that I argued with at modern day debates, this is the kind of stuff that I am talking about. Among other things, there's all sorts of issues that policing and city councils and governments do that are bad, but this is a prime example of doing something that is just asinine, backwards, and just does not need to happen at all. Period. There's no reason why she should have spent a day in jail. Period.
And her mugshot was released to the local press. Now, the charges were dropped, but she said the damage was done, so she sued city officials, and they argued for qualified immunity.
Bullshit. Qualified immunity is such crap. Oh, it wasn't ruled about on the courts. The courts didn't rule on it yet. They didn't rule on it yet. How could I know that I was being a piece of shit by defaming this woman? By arresting her, making her look bad after she won the council seat and called us to account. You really think people are buying it? Maybe in your town where people don't like her, maybe. I don't buy it. None of y'all should buy this shit either. Bullshit.
Now, one court said that the city officials did not enjoy qualified immunity and allowed Gonzalez's lawsuit to go forward. But then a divided panel on the federal appeals court said that the government officials did enjoy qualified immunity, going against Gonzalez. Here's the lay of the legal land. If you think you're unlawfully arrested for retaliation for engaging in protected speech, you have to show that the police did not have probable cause to arrest you. But there's an exception to that rule, like jaywalking, for example, when the police technically have probable cause to arrest you, but they rarely do so.
Yeah, this is what I'm saying. Like, probable cause, like, when I talked about in the debate, I talked about the laws being fair or administered fairly being an issue with how people's trust in government can be broken down, and therefore, people are more apt to engage in crime because of the lack of trust. It is stuff like this I'm talking about. Who gets arrested, put in jail for a few days or a day, has the charges dropped for accidentally taking a piece of paper, or even intentionally taking a piece of paper? Practically nobody. Practically no one. And if it's this minor, we have problems. We have problems. There's only about 10 seconds left, so we'll let it continue. But yeah, that's the kind of stuff I was talking about. And it needs to be looked at. And this is crap. Why I don't like qualified immunity. Qualified immunity is really, really sketchy as just a standard of law. Yeah, we can say that there are instances where the police honestly made a mistake that violated someone's rights, and maybe they shouldn't be held to a large amount of account for that. And then there's other times where it's like, well, we know you made a mistake, but it was so bad we need to hold you accountable. Like, both of those two things can be at the same time. But with qualified immunity, it's basically like, well, they kind of had cause to do this, so what they did wasn't illegal or unjust. It's bullshit. This should be a basis. This should rely on our traditions of common law and judges actually serving judgment on cases to suss that out. Judges and juries doing cases on this to suss out those instances. It shouldn't be a clear cut like, well, they had probable cause, so what they did wasn't bad. No. Let the legal process play out. Stop this bullshit, honestly.
In that case, you have to show objective evidence that you were arrested when similarly situated other folks who were not engaged in protected speech were not arrested. And this case is going to clarify what exactly you have to show.
Yeah, it'll clarify some of it, but it's not going to clarify all of it. All right. But we have more cases to cover, so let's go on to the next one here. And this one is, can Trump too small be trademarked? Trump too small be trademarked. So this is going to cover instances of trademarking things that were offensive or to people, that was opened up with an interesting case about I think it was last year or the year before. We actually covered it. It was a very interesting case about a Asian American, I want to say it's a punk band, a rock group of some sort, maybe not punk band, that called themselves the Slants. And they said, well, why shouldn't we be able to trademark our name that we're using as kind of like a reclaimed identity for ourselves, that this isn't offensive for this at all. And this is one of those weird cases where the people that argued for it also were joined by racists that argued for it, and it ended up, the Supreme Court was like, well, no, this is free speech. We can't be policing what is, and it's not offensive. And so this is a run of those results. This is how can we still do that with the laws that are written and the carve outs that we created for those particular laws. when that case was adjudicated and ruled in favor of the band, and they were able to trademark their name, even though it was like an offensive racial slur, there was a push by a bunch of people to, you know, trademark the N-word and like all sorts of other stuff. But like a group of people came out and like started trademarking everything that they could think of that was super offensive to block it from being trademarked by other people. So the N-word, the F-word, the R-word, combinations thereof, all got trademarked by like a consortium of like for a nonprofit to stop other people from using it in creative works and t-shirts and things like that, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, we can go over that case again. I think it might be an interesting case just to cover and talk about the ramifications of it. But yeah, it was an interesting case. You can look it up. It was let me get the case. Slant Supreme Court case. I forgot what it's called. Yeah. Here, I'm gonna drop a NPR link in the chat because this is a fun thing. This is a fun little thing here. There's the NPR link talking about it. This was all the way back in 2017, so I actually don't think we covered it. I don't think we were a thing back then. Yeah, so it was interesting. And then here is the Supreme Court, Mattel Interim Director, United States Patent and Trademark Office versus Tam, who is the lead singer or lead of the band. And here is their here's the ruling of that as well. Very interesting case. I think we should talk about it. So, well, let's get into this one. Let's get into this one here. Well, actually, let's put this. Let's go ahead and play.
Can you register a trademark using a living person's name? For example, what if somebody wanted to trademark something with your name without your permission? Well, the Supreme Court considered that question this week in a case about what this t-shirt says.
I'm going in blind on this, so I actually don't know what's going to happen here. So let's do it. Let's react live, everybody.
Steve Elster wants to trademark this phrase. Now, he says the phrase is intended to convey that some features about Trump and his policies are diminutive. But the Patent and Trademark Office rejected that application. They say that federal trademark law prohibits registering a trademark that uses the name of a living person without that person's permission. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, that's the court that
I think that this is actually a fair law to have because it can get into the realm of defamation and libel, depending on the medium in which it's used. And I think it's fair. Like, if you don't own your name, like you don't own your name, right? Like, other people can have the exact same name as you, but if it's directed at you, but like I said, we're going in blind, so I don't know what's going on. Let's continue.
That handles patent and trademark issues like this said that denying Elster's request would violate the First Amendment, and the government doesn't have an interest in restricting speech that's critical of the government or public figures.
Correct.
But this week, during oral argument, the justices seem to disagree, and they seem to lean toward denying Elster's trademark request. Justice Sotomayor questioned how it could be a First Amendment violation if Elster can still sell t-shirts with the phrase on it as many as he wants, whenever he wants.
True.
The government isn't telling him he can't use the phrase, just that he can't trademark it. In fact, trademarks are a benefit provided by the government, Justice Kagan pointed out. And there are many cases where the court has said as long as it's not viewpoint-based discrimination, the government can give the benefit to some people and not give the benefit to others.
Yeah, and so the reason why this is being considered a benefit rather than it being a free speech issue is because by offering the trademark, it prevents other people from using that phrase in the actions of a business. So it gives them copyright protection and exclusivity over said thing in the course of a business. So it's actually, that's the benefit. If the government itself is saying you cannot do this at all, then it actually comes up to a free speech issue. So that's actually I think that's a compelling argument coming from Megan Kagan and Justice Sotomayor on this kind of issue. Again, I think this could be in the realm of defamation and stuff like that, but I'm getting that argument. I get that argument.
Justices Gorsuch and Kavanaugh focused on history and the long historical tradition, they said, of restrictions on marks with the name of a living person.
Okay.
What do you think?
Yeah, so I think this is like an interesting. I think this is actually an interesting case. I think we can say that the government being engaged in protection of business interest that can be seen as defamatory as an issue in and of itself as well, and I would be interested to see them kind of explore that during the case, if at all. And if they didn't touch on that, that's kind of interesting in my opinion. I also believe that this isn't actually kind of like the thing I was talking about with the slants, but it's in the same kind of realm of it. So yeah, so I don't know. We'll see. But we have one more case to cover, so let's go ahead and get into it here. And this case is about domestic violence and the right to own arms. And this is a very complicated case. The case itself is not complicated. The guy that bringing this case to the court is a massive piece of shit. He should be He should be in prison. He should be in prison probably for a very long time, given all the things that he has done. Massive piece of shit. The guy that's bringing this case. Fuck him 5 ways to Sunday. He is an objectionable person. I don't use the term evil much when it comes to talking about people, but this guy is a bad dude. 100% full stop. No one should debate about this. This guy is a massive piece of crap. To give you some recap about this, and I'm sure that SCOTUS is going to get into it. SCOTUS Blog's going to get into as well. But just a long story short about this guy has a restraining order placed against him by his ex. And he has been engaged in stalking and opening fire with his weapon in her vicinity, either at her or to intimidate her and those around her. The protective order was issued by the court, which is supposed to take away his right to bear arms while that protective order is in effect. And now he's saying, well, you can't do that because you're violating my right to protect myself through this. Guns rights activists have jumped on this case as a means of arguing that this should not be pertained to him. They're saying that he should just be in prison. He probably should just be in prison. I think that he should be in prison, but I also believe that like a restraining order is kind of a method of creating the space to find somebody criminally responsible for a crime without putting them in prison prior to that being resolved as well. And I look at this as being one of those situations where there is a balancing act that should be done. It just needs to be done on the side of, in this case, this specific case, it should be done on the side of safety. But writ large, it should be one of those things where if a protective order is granted, then that protective order should also go towards a person, potentially seeing prison time, as well as trying to protect the victim who got the protective order. And in the interim, while that's being done, that person should not be allowed to own a firearm. I think that's the needle that needs to be thread here, because you don't want people to, get protective orders or temporary injunctions and stuff like that and have that be used as a tool to violate people's rights. At the same time, you don't want to have a person that has a protective order have to fear for their life because the person that they have one against, who is a giant piece of crap, is now able to go buy firearms and retaliate in other ways. But this is going to be explained. A lot of that is going to be explained in this clip here. I'm sure of it. I'm going into this one blind as well, but I wanted to bring those things up in case they don't get brought up in this video. But let's go ahead and let it start.
Right now, there's a federal ban on having a gun if you're subject to a domestic violence restraining order. And
the Laufenberg Amendment was this on as well.
Today, the Supreme Court heard a challenge to that ban as unconstitutional and violating the Second Amendment. Now, after oral argument, it looks like the ban will survive, but here's what happened in the room.
Okay.
Explainer on the details and the background of the case, but it comes to the court after a Texas state court issued a domestic violence restraining order against Zaki Rahimi in 2020 after he assaulted his then girlfriend and the mother of his child and fired a gun at a witness to the incident. Yeah. The order barred him from going near her and from possessing a gun. In the following year, he was a suspect in a series of...
This person has proven that they are not capable as of right now to be a responsible gun owner. If they cannot be a responsible gun owner, whether or not they should be in prison is a separate question. You fired the gun at somebody, fired the gun at the witness to this domestic dispute. That means that he cannot be trusted to hold a gun safely. If he served prison time for that crime, that doesn't mean that he's still trustworthy to have a gun after the fact, if he was in jail or if he's pending trial. Absolutely, this person is a giant piece of crap. I understand the legal issues, the rights issues surrounding this. I hope everybody on the other side understands why this is such an issue, though.
Series of shootings, and police searched his home where they found a pistol and a shotgun. So he got charged under 922G, which is a federal law that bans the possession of a firearm if you're the subject of a domestic violence restraining order. Another important piece here is the Supreme Court's recent decision in Bruin that says courts should uphold gun restrictions only if there's a tradition of similar regulations in U.S. history.
Yeah, and Ruin was the whole notion that the right to bear arms shall not be infringed, but we're going to make some exceptions if there was some sort of regulation that existed at the time of the founding of the country and maybe the 20 or 30 years thereafter that restricted the rights of people from carrying weapons into certain places and that sort of thing, in tradition with what the intent of the founding fathers was at the time that the law was written. Intent matters. I don't believe in a static constitution. I believe that there's room for the expansionist constitution, especially when, then this is probably going to get brought up, but I'll bring it up prior to it. Women didn't have much rights at all in the United States during the founding of the country. There was domestic violence was not even conceived of. Violations of people's rights and autonomy was just a simple criminal justice issue, and maybe you got satisfaction from entering a duel. Like, these are things we don't do anymore. You shouldn't just rely on that kind of thinking going forward.
Today, the government argued in favor of keeping the ban, saying that Bruin actually affirmed that the government's allowed to take away guns from people who are not responsible, law-abiding citizens, for example, from felons or drug addicts. True. Of course, what's tricky there is how do you define responsible and law-abiding? As the chief pointed out during oral argument, responsibility is a very broad concept, and he asked something along the lines of, would someone who doesn't take his recycling out to the curb on the proper day be irresponsible?
Oh, Jesus Christ. I hate arguments. I hate absurd ad nauseum arguments. You don't need to create an absurd situation to reveal the flaw of every single argument ever. A responsible gun owner is a person that does responsible things with a gun. It should be spelled out, broadly speaking, what that means. But the notion of, well, if you don't take your recycle out, are you responsible? Like, no, shut the fuck up, Roberts. Be better than this, for fuck's sake.
The government said that responsibility is intrinsically tied to the danger you would present if you were allowed to have access to firearms. Justice Jackson seemed to suggest there was a problem with the history and traditions test. She pointed out that men who were engaged in domestic violence historically were actually not perceived as dangerous at the time. And so her question was, if we're still applying modern sensibilities, what's the point of going to the founding era to look for an analog to this type of gun restriction? The lawyer had a tough bench when Hagan pressed him on his argument that there essentially shouldn't be a ban like this if one similar didn't exist, saying if you're looking...
if one similar didn't exist at the time that the law was created, the founding of the country was done, rather. There's some audio issues with this recording, but that's what's going on.
For a ban on domestic abusers possessing guns at the founding, you're not going to find one. Justice Kavanaugh also pointed out that the federal background check system that's used for the sale and purchase of firearms incorporates that domestic violence restraining order information. And if Rahimi wins, then the government couldn't stop people with domestic violence restraining orders from being able to purchase guns. We'll likely get a decision on this one sometime next year.
And that is the extent of our SCOTUS reporting for today. Now, these cases are fairly big, but there's other ones that are shaping up to be even bigger that we covered in the last few weeks. There's a couple of cases revolving around issues of censorship by big tech companies. Also, there's an issue of whether or not a politician can block somebody on social media if that violates a person's free speech, the inability to redress public grievances to elected officials. That is also going to be heard in this term, or has been heard and will be decided on in the next year or so. These are all important cases that are going to shape the political landscape for the foreseeable future. And so as those cases are decided on and we get more information about them, we'll be sure to share them with y'all. But that, my friends, concludes this segment of the News Roundup. So let's get more news, right? More news, so much more news to cover. We got a lot of ground to cover, so we're going to keep covering some ground here. So let's go ahead and get into some economic updates, which is what we're doing this week, as opposed to covering Ukraine, Israel, and other foreign policy and war-focused reporting. And we have some giant news coming out from the SAG-AFTRA strike, with a historic contract being signed between the Screen Actors Guild and the American Federation of Trade. What the hell does it stand for? Hold on. I know it's Screen Actors Guild, but what does AFTRA stand for? I forgot. AFTRA meaning American Federation of Television and Radio Artists. So the TV component of that. Screen Actors Guild is the movie component, and the other one is TV show component in a single union. So let's get into it. So according to reporting from the French newspaper The World, on the end of the ad for strike, we have the following. So actually, let's go ahead and just cut that. So let's just get into this reporting. So after a 118-day strike, Hollywood actors have finally won the battle. They got the deal they were looking for with the country's 4 major studios: Disney, Warner Brothers, Netflix, and Universal, as well as CEOs came to the negotiating table. Last Wednesday, they finally conceded to a pay raise of between 7 and 8%, compensation for the use of their characters by artificial intelligence, and bonuses for successful films and series on streaming channels such as Netflix. Studios were in a hurry to put an end to this widely followed strike, which had already compromised Christmas releases and threatened the 2024 summer season as well. All the more so as this actor strike followed that of the screenwriters, who had put down their pencils this summer and reached an agreement at the end of September. Now, the record-breaking contract will head to a union vote on Tuesday to be ratified with a simple majority vote. The agreement, which has 86% broad approval, puts an end to the longest actor strike ever. As SAG-AFTRA's chief negotiator, Duncan Cartree Ireland, previously reported to Rolling Stone, the deal calls for actors or their estates, should they pass away, to have approval over their digital replicas and to be compensated for their use. Quote, "Whenever one of our companies is going to make a replica of an actor using digital technology, including artificial intelligence, they have to actually disclose to the actor exactly what that replica is going to be doing and used for. And the actor has a right to say yes or no to that. And if they say yes, they get compensated for it, none of which existed before," explained Cabtree Ireland. This is a huge thing. This is one of the bigger sticking points with SAG-AFTRA's contract with the studios, because they were wanting to take all manner of people, put them through in front of a green screen, making different gestures, facial expressions, etc., and then eliminating them completely from the process and using stand-in AI generated people for certain different scenes, whether it be full-length movies or, background actors that are just there for character ambiance and the like. Now that they have this, that is a huge victory for SAG-AFTRA, because that was one of the bigger sticking points. But he also had more to say, so let's continue on. Quote, AI protection is going to extend to the use of any kind of image or likeness of deceased performers, so their estate or their heirs or the beneficiaries of their representatives will have the ability to say yes or no to that. So there's really a robust set of protections for performers that I think will not only protect them during the trial of this contract, but for many years thereafter. And it's huge. That, like I said, this is one of the bigger sticking points. It means that that AI can't just be used to replace actors without their consent. There's not going to be wide contracts where you're signing like a 40-page document and buried in there like, we reserve the right to use your likeness in like 20 different things, and have 8,000 different clips of you strung together in order to create an entire movie that they can claim you acted in when you really didn't, sort of thing. The other big portion of this is the agreement between the actors and the studios as far as streaming. And that one's actually got a bit more nuance to it, because the way they're doing the compensation is kind of recognizing the reality of streaming, but in this kind of weird way. So to broadly go over it as quickly as we can here, what they agreed to was essentially that if a TV show or movie has, I want to say it's 20% of the subscriptions that view it, that will be considered a hit. So if Netflix has, let's just do some basic math here. So if there's only 1 million subscribers to Netflix and 20% watches the stuff, so if the show gets 200,000 views on Netflix, that's 20% of 1 million. We know that it's more than that. Just bear with me. Then that show is going to be considered a hit. When that show is considered a hit, the studio pays out to the Screen Actors, or to SAG-AFTRA, to the unions, an extra bonus of royalties for that show or movie. And then that money pool is then distributed, broadly speaking, across the entire union. Or the members that were involved in that show or involved in these things. So it's not compensating directly every single person for like every single view or a particular show. And given the realities of streaming and stuff, that might be a bit impossible, but it will lead to bonuses being given to a lot more people for shows that are relatively popular. I don't know the specifics, and I don't think they've all been like written out within the union's contract with its members for the dissipation of funds from that. But this is going to lead to streaming, and this is going to lead to basically a creation of some streaming residuals being given to more actors, if not all actors, for shows going to Netflix, HBO Max, like all those kind of streaming services, Disney, Hulu Plus, or Disney Plus, Hulu, etc., which is going to be big. It's going to be big because it means that the popularity of a show is going to be properly reflected within compensation for the actors. So that's another big thing, and that was the second biggest issue that they were facing with this. So between the pay raise, the AI stuff, and this, I think we have a actually pretty decent contract, and that contract is only, I believe, for 5 years. So the 5-year contract, and they're going to renegotiate it after 5 years because they don't know where technology is going to take us in the next 5 years with AI and things like that. So they don't want to have like a super long contract with these things and then have to, suffer under it when new things happen that weren't accounted for. All in all, I think this is a great win for SAG-AFTRA, and I think it's a great win for the rest of us because it will mean it should mean a return to better quality content on the streaming platforms, as well as more fairly compensated actors therein. Not just the big name people, but also the little people that are in these films, background actors, second characters, and the like. But there's more labor news that we have to talk about with union victories. And of course, I'm going to be talking now about the UAW and their strike and what has happened therein. Let's get into it. So the Detroit Free Press reported that the UAW president, Shawn Fain, used a Facebook Live session last Wednesday to reflect on the wins in the tentative agreements with Ford Motor Company, General Motors, and Stellantis, the now Big Three. Quote, "We won our dignity back as auto workers. We won back our pride in being a UAW and being able to wear this label on our chest," he said, pointing to the union logo on his jacket. "We won back our strike muscle." Fain, who noted that thousands of non-union auto workers have been inspired by our victory and starting to organize, talked about the 25% general wage increases over the life of the contract and the reinstatement of cost of living adjustments. These are huge wins. Unions are winning major ground across the country right now, and it is a combination of COVID making people realize what dignity is and fighting for it back. It's a combination of, President Biden's National Labor Relations Board being more pro-worker instead of, being pro-corporation. It's a combination of various different things. But at the end of the day, these workers fought and won for proper compensation. And a lot of that is due, again, to how COVID kind of reset everybody's expectations of what right is when it comes to working. And one of the other big things about this is that the UAW had and its members gave up a lot in order to help rescue the United States auto sector after the Great Recession. And they hadn't been compensated back to what they were essentially promised in those negotiations. And now they're going to get that. 25% general wage increase is huge. Adjusting for cost of living is huge. This is going to be a good booster to not only the auto workers themselves, but the wider economy as it is more shared equitably. But there's more to talk about. Let's keep getting into it. Now, Fain said that the contracts would be, quote, "a big first step toward a just electrical vehicle transition for workers." Fain gave a recap of how talks went, how the strategy allowed the union to play one company against another, and how the threat of a strike against the big moneymaker truck plants proved effective. The Detroit Three didn't understand the strategy, and even when they thought they had it down, the union opted to change the rules. He pointed to, for example, the strike at Ford's Kentucky truck plant that came without notice, a move that Fain said supercharged the bargaining. The automakers had whipsawed the union plants and even countries against one another for decades, Fain said, and the union gave them a taste of their own medicine. Quote, "It turns out they couldn't stomach it," he said. The strike strategy took the initial wage offer from 9% to 25% and led to 30 contract offers across 3 companies. Fain worked in a few references to extreme wealth inequality, a theme he has highlighted often in painting the UAW's fight for a fair contract as a fight for the working class, but that wasn't the main point. He pushed back against the assumption that the union was too focused on other agendas, noting that, quote, "We were laser focused on getting the best deals possible for our membership." Of the nearly 20,000 employees on strike and affected by the strike at Ford, 98% have returned to their jobs thus far, the automaker said in a news release. Only 45 workers at Chicago's stamping in Chicago Heights, Illinois, and 372 workers at Cleveland Engine in Brook Park, Ohio, have not yet been called back, Ford spokesman Dan Barbosa told the Free Press on Wednesday. In related news from the Hill, Honda plans to increase wages for workers at U.S. factories by 11% in January. Honda is not unionized. Yeah, hot union autumn is true for that one. That Apache ace fail winter. Fucking true. But yes, lots of stuff happening. Unions are going strong. It's really good. Yeah, the Japanese automaker Continuing on with the story though, the Japanese automaker will also decrease the time it takes workers to reach top wage rate from 6 years to 3 years, proving once again that wins for unions help non-union members as well. You should still join a union if you have the ability to and your sector has a union to join and it can argue on your behalf, but this shows that it's not something just for union workers when they win. It helps everybody. Now, this increase from Honda matches similar commitments made by Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis, the company confirmed on Friday. But we still have more labor news to talk about because this is all about the labor. This is all about workers and labor today in this economy segment. So we're going to keep continuing on. Next up with Las Vegas strikes and threatened by its own unions has been averted. So what happened here? Let's get into it. So CNN reported Friday morning in Las Vegas. CNN reported Friday morning in Las Vegas that saw labor peace and not a threatened strike along the strip as the culinary union reached its third tentative labor deal in 3 days with the casino operator. The union that represents more than 35,000 cooks, food servers, bartenders, housekeepers, and other workers at 18 major casinos had threatened to wage the largest strike in U.S. hospitality industry history, starting at 5 a.m. local time on Friday. Instead, it announced a tentative deal with the Wynn Resorts, which followed similar agreements Thursday with MGM Resorts International, which owns 8 of the casinos, and Wednesday at Caesars Entertainment, which owns 9 of the casinos. So again, the similar strategy of pitting one company against another with its workers across a sector, taking the Nordic model here a little bit, is proving to be a good strategy going forward. And this, again, is another issue of wages not keeping up with inflation and record profits and people demanding their fair share. We can argue about the labor theory of value and everything else like that, but if a company is making record profits and that company is not sharing those profits with its workers, then what the fuck is the point of working at that company? There is none. And so that's where unions come in to strike, to leverage the power of collective bargaining, of collective issues, of collective strongness. I don't know. I'm getting lost for words here, but that's where unions come in to make things better. And that is being proven across the entire country. SAG-AFTRA, UAW, now Kaiser Permanente, and now we have CVS is probably striking. I think CVS is another one. And with the casinos. Let's continue on though. While details of this agreement were not immediately available, the union chief negotiator called the deals historic and life-changing for members, many of whom have to work 2 jobs to support themselves and their families. Quote, after 7 months of negotiations, we are proud to say that this is the best contract and economic package we have ever won for in our 88 years history, said Ted Papagorge, Secretary Treasurer for the union and its chief negotiator. Giuliani stated, quote, with the new union contract, hospitality workers will be able to provide for their families and thrive in Las Vegas. And that's a huge thing. I mean, they make that city run. Las Vegas is essentially just a tourist city. Without hospitality workers, that city could not function. It would not be the tourist attraction that it is from all over the globe. And if they can't afford to feed their families and pay for the increased cost of living, especially in cities that are experiencing growth and increases to property values and increases in rent and stuff like that, they can't function. You can't expect a person to work if they can't afford to live in the places where they work. You just can't expect that. And so this is another big victory for workers and for union members, and shows just how unions can operate to the good of other people. So this is big. This is also big. And this is proving to be a banner year or not just year, a decade. We're going into 2024. This is like the third. This is what so there was three in the last week. There was the Writers Guild. There was Kaiser Permanente. There's all sorts of other, the Starbucks, the Amazon. We're gearing up to have 2020 be the decade of labor and increased labor rights in the US. And I just hope it continues. I really do. But will it continue? What's the forecast of going into 2024? Well, it looks like, as we just alluded to, that it is going to continue. Let's get into it. So Business Insider reports that if workers' movements pick up in the months and years ahead, it shouldn't be a big surprise. Workforce and union experts told Insider that the economy is ripe for many workers to demand more. Partially because of the record profits some companies have reported in recent years mean more money to go around. Plus, they said the kind of worker action that's made the news in recent months is often contagious. Only 11% of U.S. workers are represented by a union that could take action like those in the news recently. But the same forces propelling unions could push non-union workers to unionize themselves or simply flex their bargaining power during their next salary negotiations. Experts told Insider that they expect more workers in the auto, healthcare, education, food service industries, and others to demand more from their employers in the years to come. And I hope that it comes. But that does conclude this segment of the News Roundup. We have some more economic news to cover, though. We have some stuff coming out of the Fed and with the labor market itself. So we're going to get into it here after I itch my nose, because apparently allergies are a thing in the fall. But let's get into it. Let's get into some more economic news. Again, we're doing this every other week or so where there's big news coming out of labor or the economy in general, the Fed, etc. So let's get into it. So coming up with the Fed. So in reporting from CNN, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell is leaving the door open for additional interest rate hikes to defeat inflation. Quote, "We know that ongoing progress towards our 2% goal is not assured. Inflation has given us a few head fakes," Powell said at a conference hosted in Washington, D.C. by the International Monetary Fund. Continuing on, he stated, quote, "If it becomes appropriate to tighten policy further, we will not hesitate to do so." In other words, the Fed is not comfortable saying that they're not going to raise rates, even though the market keeps pricing in the fact that the Fed is going to stop raising rates because of falling inflation, increased labor, softening labor conditions, etc. But the Fed doesn't want to telegraph that too much because they don't want to cause issues, unintended or otherwise. So they're going to be like, hey, you can't tell us what to do. We're the Fed. We're going to tell you what to do. Got that? That's what we have here. Now, if the Fed hikes again, it will likely be only once more and may come during the U.S. Central Bank's upcoming policy meeting in December. However, investors are bullish about another pause in rate hikes next month, according to Fed funds rate futures. Powell made it clear that the Fed is carefully balancing the risk that inflation could reignite versus the risk the central bank could cause unnecessary economic damage. In other words, they are still shooting for a soft landing. And there's been head fakes on that too. Did we have a recession in 2022? I don't know. It was a mild one if we had one, but then there was revisions and might have not had one. Are we going to have a recession in 2024? I don't know. The labor market keeps doing this and it's still going. So everything is still kind of up in the air. We're in this very weird period of kind of a weird labor global economic oddity that only happens after giant events like a pandemic. And so we're kind of being flown by the seat of our pants and we don't know what's going on. I personally believe that we will not see a recession in 2024. I think that has been pushed back because of COVID and global financial leaders doing things to prevent complete economic collapse. And so we might not see one until 2026, 2028 timeframe. If we do have a recession in 2024, I don't think it's going to be a great recession. I do think it will be fairly mild. In other words, it won't be deep It won't be a deep recession. It will rebound fairly quickly. It will put economic politics into a tizzy, and nobody knows what's going to come from that if it happens. But right now, signs are pointing to a modest economy. A modest economy. But what did Jerome Powell say, though? He said the following, quote, "The unwinding of pandemic-related supply and demand distortions is playing an important role in the decline of inflation." In other words, the supply chain issues that we had in 2022, or 2021, 2022, beginning of 2023, are more or less equalized. There's still a couple of things that are still being wonky. The labor market is still wonky because of early retirements, because of death, because of people getting long COVID or readjusting their family life balance, women leaving the workforce in droves and not all of them going back due to the pandemic. And so there's still these issues that are bewildering policy makers that are still with us. And it's going to be with us for some time. Again, COVID did reset people's expectations on many things, and we're still dealing with that. It isn't the great reset that a lot of conspiracy-minded people are like, oh my God, the world's going to be taken over by them people. Like, it's not that. It's more of the fact that people understood what they're worth and had their expectations of what they should be willing to accept and what their actual life prospects are being completely reset due to a global pandemic that made people reevaluate their lives during lockdowns because of fear of death and actually being faced with their own mortality. Never underestimate the collective psychology of people when disaster strikes that upends someone's entire life. It happens after every war. It's happened after every pandemic. It's happened after every kind of like weird sociological phenomenon that like took countries over, from religious fervor to like the age of the hippies in the 60s, that sort of stuff. So this is not unexpected. The results might be unexpected, but the fact that this happened is not. You feel me? You understand me? All right, I think you do. Let's continue on. Now, Jerome Powell added that demand will likely have to slow down for the central bank to be assured that inflation is on track to cool to 2%. In other words, people are still spending a lot of money because they are making more, or they're just like, fuck it, man, I don't need to save. I'm going to have a family now, whatever. So that's what we're seeing here. And so they still want to like, hey, economy, hit a wall a little bit, please. Please, economy, please. But I don't see that happening anytime soon. I mean, there's some measures of things in the economy where it shows some slowing down, but I don't know, man. I think people, if you compare people's wages from now to 2019, if you compare people's expectations from now to 2019, especially with older millennials like myself, you're seeing family formation, not like super fast, not like a lot of them happening, or at least comparatively to like the boomers or Gen X, but you're seeing that to start. And with the weird demographic bubble that we're in, with the majority of people being between, not the majority of people, but the majority of millennials now being in family formation age, because of the fact that the youngest millennial, if we take it to 1996 as the official cutoff, the youngest millennial is 27 years old. Family formation happens between the ages of, typically speaking, it's been pushed back from millennials due to catastrophe after catastrophe, is typically between 25 and 35 years old. So all millennials are in that age range except the oldest ones. And even then, since they were pushed back due to the Great Recession, they're in family formation too. When you're in family formation, when you're getting married, when you're starting to have kids, when you're starting to settle down, what do? Buy houses, furniture, goods for kids. You start having kids. All that stuff is happening. So we're in this weird demographic bubble here that is good for economic growth. Okay. Despite all the things of like millennials, like we can't afford to have kids, we can't afford to do this. Like, yes, that's true for many people. But people are going to do it anyways, because it's either do it now or never, because you're starting to get too old. So people will make do. And that's what we're kind of seeing here. And we have to acknowledge that. For its part, though, the U.S. economy expanded at a scorching 4.9% annualized rate in the third quarter. Again, for all the reasons I just stated, thanks to robust consumer spending. Again, for all the things I just stated. American shoppers doling out for high-profile concerts, films, and travel was a hallmark of the summer's robust economic strength. Despite the fact that Taylor Swift concert tickets were going for $2,500 a pop, people were still buying them. So inflation sucks. Apparently it doesn't suck enough for some people. I'm never paying $2,000 for a ticket to go to a concert. Not happening. I could win the lottery and I'd probably still not do that. But a lot of people are. That's what's going on. Now, this could potentially be a headache for the Fed, though, since strong demand could be maintaining some of the upward pressure on prices, because it is. The Fed's mechanisms for addressing inflation is by deliberately slowing down demand through higher interest rates. You increase the cost of borrowing debt, you delay people's entry into the marketplace for goods, and hopefully slow down the buying thereof. End quote. Going forward, it may be that a greater share of the progress in reducing inflation will have to come from tight monetary policy restraining the growth of aggregate demand, Powell said. In other words, got to raise those interest rates to get you to stop spending. Got to make it more expensive to live so you don't buy stuff. That's what they're hoping to do. It is wrong-headed. They shouldn't do this, and I don't think they can actually really accommodate for all these things. But that's what they're going to do, which is why the possibility of the Fed pushing us into a recession is still there. But if they keep pausing, they don't have to cut rates. They pause again, or if they delay again, especially after the federal government restarts student loan payments, which is an inflation fighting mechanism. It is. So if they pause because we're like, well, the federal government collected X dollars of receipts from loan repayments, that slowed the economy down. We don't need to do that. Like you don't need the federal government and the Federal Reserve both hitting the brakes at the same time. Just like you don't need the federal government and the Federal Reserve both pushing the gas at the same time. It's a delicate balancing act. If you do both too quickly, which is kind of what we had during the pandemic, then you're going to cause a jerking in the economy forward that can cause problems. Just like you can do the reverse back if you hit the brakes too much. So the Fed, if the federal government is doing things that slow the economy, raising taxes, recuperating money from student loan repayments, from not investing so much by cutting spending, if they're doing all that, the Federal Reserve doesn't need to do the same thing, and vice versa. And that's what we have to acknowledge. I just wish they would. Continuing on, though. Interest rates are currently at a 22-year high, and the Fed has signaled that it will likely keep rates elevated for longer. The central bank's latest set of economic projections released in September reflected fewer cuts next year than previously estimated. Insider reported on its chart of the day for November 9th from ING Economics, which shows that the inflation is set to hit the Federal Reserve's long-term target of 2% by April of next year and fall below 2% not long thereafter. These are reasons why I don't think the Fed needs to do anything. Pause. And as soon as that drops below 2% inflation, maybe not as soon as, say it's below 2% inflation for a quarter, cut a little bit of the rate. Just a little bit. Just a little off the top. Just maybe 0.3%. Maybe 0.5%. Half a point cut. Just a little trim. So you can maintain 2%. And then if it drops again, a little trim to maintain 2%. I personally think the federal's target rate should be between 3 and 4%. That's my personal preference. I think that gives enough economic wiggle room for labor to demand more, for workers to have more say in the economy, for a more fair distribution of economic wealth in the economy. But if the Fed is still intent on keeping it at 2%, this is the things it should do. Just saying. But what else is also helping drive inflation? Well, it is a reduction in pricing power among businesses, which for the past 2 years relied on steady price hikes to fuel growth. In other words, businesses were using the excuse of pandemic shortages to jack up prices and therefore jack up profits. People are now being like, whoa, okay, this is done. We can't abide by you jacking up prices anymore. Those are going to have to come down some, or at least not be met as much, which is why you're starting to see more deals in chain stores. For example, Family Dollar and Dollar General have done more deals where you buy like 2 cases of soda and you get like a third free. Like that's going on more often now. You're seeing prices of those were like at $9 or so. Like obviously I drink a lot of soda, but those were at like $9.50 or so. I think it was around maybe it was $8.50 or so for a case. It's down to $7.50 now, like that sort of stuff. It's starting to take effect. So they can't do that anymore to gin up profits. Now, what this means though, is that the Fed's interest rate hikes are likely over, with July representing the last hike of the current cycle, if ING economics analyst is correct. Quote, the Fed is still officially forecasting one further 0.25 basis points, 0.25% basis point increase, interest rate rise this year. Sorry, let me just go ahead and say that again. Quote, the Fed is still officially forecasting one further 25 basis point interest rate rise this year, but we doubt it will follow through. The Fed's last hiked rates in July, and since then, financial and credit conditions have tightened, ING Economics said, citing higher borrowing costs for mortgages and credit cards. And to wrap up our segment on the economy, we have the labor market. And according to Bloomberg, Federal Reserve Governor Christopher Waller said the U.S. labor market is cooling this year without there being a big spike in unemployment. This is due to the economy returning to a better balance between the supply and demand for workers. Quote, it's slowing down, Waller said in a speech in St. Louis. Continuing on, he stated, quote, we're looking at the labor market, we're seeing it normalized and getting into a better balance between supply and demand. Waller made his comments following signs the labor market has shown of easing. Non-farm payroll increased by only 150,000 last month, following a downwardly revised 297,000 gain in September, a Bureau of Labor Statistics report showed on Friday. The unemployment rate climbed to 30.9%, and monthly wage growth slowed. The Fed governor pointed out that the ratio of job openings to the number of unemployed workers has come down in recent months as well. Quote, what we've seen since May of 2022, vacancies have kind of come down and the unemployment rate is still very, very low, he said. We had labor, let's look up really quick because it was at 11 million job openings per person, The number of job openings was at 11 million, and that was roughly 2 jobs for every person looking for a job. And the current rates are number of open positions, U.S. economy. That has fallen from around 11.5 million to 9.5 million job openings, and the number of people looking for work, which is a much lower. So that's what we're at now. That's as of September, is 9.5 million. So the economy is slowing a bit. There's also the fact that, there's an equilibrium here where the number of jobs and the number of people looking for jobs hits a point where there's nowhere else to go. And we're seeing some of that play out. So what does that mean for workers looking for jobs? It means that there's going to be a little more competition, but there's still a lot of jobs opening for people. Still, we're still 9.5 million jobs opening. That's still a lot of jobs needing to be filled. So we still have a labor shortage, which means that people are still going to be able to argue for increased pay increases going forward. But my friends, that concludes this segment of the news roundup. And finally, to close out the news roundup, if you haven't watched this before, if it's been a while, we like to close out our news roundup with some news of the weird. And it's usually something fun, something maybe gross, dealing with animals often, and the like. And this week is no different. We have our first story. Our first story is about spiders. You've been warned. If you don't like spiders, look away. If you don't like gross stuff, look away. But we're gonna watch this real quick and then talk about it. What? In the ear? That's gross. Look at that. How did that little spider get? It's the color of her ear. How did it happen? This is in China? The hell? Wow. All right. So we have that little clip here of it. So what happened there essentially was a woman in China complained about pain in her ear canal, and they found spiders in it. So yeah, weird stuff. Animals can live in weird places, and that includes the human body. And now we have another story, and this one is orcas. Apparently, they're seeking revenge from against other people. Let's watch. Hopefully, this doesn't play an ad right away. All right, cool. All right, we got a paraglide. Whoa, what the fuck? Bro, you cool? Are you dead? All right, so this guy is parasailing on the ocean. This is a whale knocks off his surfboard. Look at this. Wing falling. Boom. Fuck your windsurf. He dead. Like, how is he still alive? What the hell? Yeah, I would too, man. That's a killer whale. It just knocked you out of the air. Like, it jumped out of the ocean to take you out. Jeez. Yeah. And that is from Sky News. I thought that one's a bit fun. They're coming for us. The ocean is angry. Metalocalypse warned us of this. But my friends, that concludes our news segment. We know you liked what you heard because you've stuck with us to the end, so please smash that like button for the algorithms. It really does help us out. I'd like to thank everybody that joined us on our weird off day where we redid the news. We had about 20 people or so watching in over the course of this thing, so we greatly appreciate you. Going into the new year, so starting in January of next year, we will be doing the news roundup on Sundays for now on. It's going to give us more time to prepare. Opens up the week for more ad hoc stuff. If I have to stay at work, I don't have to reschedule them. So we will be doing this starting in the next year on Sundays. We will continue this on Thursdays for the rest of the year, except during the holidays. So we will not be here during Thanksgiving. There will be no roundup, and there will be no roundup on the 21st of December as well. But we will be here on the 28th. So we hope to see you all there. Also like to thank Nikki Adams, our copy producer, because without her, our news would not be as robust and as informative as it is. So thank you, Nikki, for putting it together. Also thanks to our community, Facebook, and Discord for providing some interesting discussions and interesting news articles shared with us across the entire political spectrum, giving us a wide view of how the news is going, what they're feeling about it, for us to know for what we should cover. So if you want to see us cover it, you can join our Facebook group or our Discord server, whatever the case may be. Discord's easiest place to get a hold of me, but that is where you can share stuff like that. And as we say at Crowdsource Politics, everybody keep your head up through the political storm.